Part 5. The Foundation of Ritual Tradition. Where you are. As I previously pointed out, it's my belief that the place in which you live, your part of Turtle Island, should you live here, is highly relevant in terms of your spiritual energy and needs. Where you live is also relevant in terms of how the spiritual forces of that place affect you. You may have also gathered from my previous discussion that there is always an ancestral relationship in the perception of this spirituality. By that, regardless of your own spiritual orientation, you should respect the spirituality of those that came before you. In my case, my exposure has been primarily to the Lakota or Sioux of the Northern Plains and occasionally the Cherokee. One element of respect I see as necessary to incorporate into my prayers and my feelings is recognition of the Lenape and others that lived in the area of the East Coast where I am now. In fact, a friend of mine that carries the pipe and pours the water in a Lakota-based sweat lodge went to the Lenape elders, there's still some in this area, and asked their permission to conduct Lakota ceremony out of respect for the elders of previous generations. Wherever you are, whatever path you follow, make sure you respect the spirituality of the people that lived there before you. Their spirits are with you in that place, and you should recognize their past efforts and energy. Recognize this about the others that came before you, whether they were a part of our First Americans community or Christian or any other. All people of good hearts love the land, and they will all be there with you. A critical point. We've reached a stage in this text that will require your complete attention. I can't emphasize the following point enough. It's a key element on our First American spirituality that clearly delineates it from the majority of other quote-unquote practices. Not only does this spirituality encourage or even expect the individuation of personal quote-unquote practice within its own community, but it is absolutely tolerant and respectful of any other spirituality. What does this really mean? I'm reminded of an old joke told to me long ago. The religion that is the brunt of the story and the participant can be substituted with virtually any other to illustrate the point. It goes like this. A Protestant dies and approaches the pearly gates and greets St. Peter. St. Peter welcomes him in and begins to show him around heaven, which consists of a large building with a long hallway and many rooms along it. As they walk down the hallway, St. Peter cracks open each of the doors of these rooms and shows the Protestant the occupants of each. In here we have the Jews, in this room we have the Buddhists. In here are the Catholics, St. Peter would say as he peeked into each door. He passed one without opening it, and the Protestant inquired, "Why didn't we look in there?" St. Peter replied, "Oh, that's the Jehovah's Witnesses. They think they're the only ones up here." What you need to know of our First Americans' interpretation of spirituality, the most important aspect of it, is that it is your own. It is not expected that you conform to anyone else's needs, perspective, or interpretation. That means it is perfectly acceptable for you to remain an integral part of your present religious beliefs, as long as they are equally tolerant of these, and not sacrifice your present religious or spiritual orientation in any way. The critical difference is in tolerance and respect. Many of the world's religions are entirely intolerant of other ways of thinking. Look at it this way. I have a Christian heritage. I have not shed, ignored, or disregarded the positive elements of that experience. I particularly have not disavowed the teachings of Christ. He was a great and powerful prophet, teacher, and humble servant of the Creator. And I also do not toss away many of the teachings of the Bible, for they are equally relevant to the journey we all face. What I have not done is chosen to take other people by the hand, or by the throat, and told them that my way is the only way. Quite the reverse. As I mentioned earlier, you must not throw away your own heritage or your own experiences and disregard the positive elements of your history for the sake of a, quote, new religious practice, unquote. You must also respect each and every other person's interpretation of spirituality. You must do this because their road is not your road. Their journey is one that only they can take. A foundation of understanding. There are three very important considerations you may need in examining the following discussion. The first I touched on earlier. It's important for you to understand that I do not consider myself to be a teacher or healer or shaman of any kind. I have never been quote-unquote sanctioned or encouraged by any member of any tribal group to share these ideas and concepts in any way. The second, similarly, is the fact that these words are my own and are not intended to be representative of any group regardless of who I might mention that may have contributed to them. Lastly, and equally important, I will only be able to tell you what I know. By that, I mean what I have personally experienced. I will only relate the sum total of what I have experienced or come to understand. The areas I discuss, I'm convinced, are far more expansive than I currently understand, so I can only relate to you the limits of what I have come to know. This writing is not the result of any sort of quote-unquote research or study. All of what I tell you has come from my journey. It's true that I have occasionally read books on the subject, but little or nothing of what I have discussed or am about to present comes from them. Also, by this time, you may be curious about how all this came about for me. Briefly, if you were to choose a starting point, I have, quote, walked this way, unquote, since the spring of 1987 when I attended my first sweat lodge. Having been late, as usual for me for any event, I didn't actually participate in the ceremony. Rather, after approaching the foreboding sounds of singing and drums tucked back in the woods, I sat by what I would come to know as the, quote, sacred fire, unquote, and listened to the goings-on in the little plastic-covered hut next to me. In the following months I came back several times, this time to participate. It was a period that would take a great deal of explanation to relate, but suffice it to say that I went through some dramatic changes over the next couple of years. I've been participating in ceremony ever since, with normal periods of absence, and intend to, even if by myself, for the rest of my life. An argument against spirits. One of the first things that makes a person cock their head when I talk about these ways is the discussion of quote-unquote spirits. Many oriented by Judeo-Christian training have some trouble here. Popular culture distorts the concept of a spirit and presents it either as a sheet-wearing translucent ghost on Halloween, or it comes in conflict with the perceptions of the spirit of a savior or even God himself. Far too many people discount or outright disbelieve the existence of anything like a spirit, other than, perhaps, the Spirit of Christ or their interpretation of God. But many religions, Christianity included, speak volumes of spirit entities that are not God himself. Most people would like to ignore this possibility. It's almost near paranoia. They find a great deal of discomfort in the possibility that someone or something other than God himself could, quote-unquote, see them without their knowing it, or even worse, hear their thoughts or know their secrets. On a recent television series, one line was spoken by a female police officer that was overhearing a conversation about so-called spirits. She said, "Well, hell, I'm never going to undress again." This is how popular culture distorts and manipulates one very real circumstance in the universe. There are spirits. Our first Americans have always known this and deal with it openly and knowingly on a daily basis. Nothing we do goes unseen. Nothing we touch or see or even know is without spirit. Nowhere, at no time, are we alone. There is as much spirituality surrounding us as there is a physical environment. Once you break away from the extremely limited view that there is only one spirit and realize that spirit permeates everything in the universe, you can't help but feel related to it and humbled by it. And you can never really, quote, get away with, unquote, anything. Wakantanka, the Great Mystery. In a way, it's sad that I've taken so long to get to the point where I can begin to speak with any level of confidence about my perspective of the Creator of the universe, the original source of life and truth. God has always been a great mystery to me. It was a relief and a comfort to hear him called that by the people that have helped me on this road. At this point, I feel it's necessary to clarify a minor point. Please do not take offense at the use of the words he or him. I consider the great mystery to be genderless, or, more accurately, encompassing both genders, and the use of these terms is merely a convenience of language. The humorous element of the phrase, the great mystery, is the fact that there is not much to say. The great mystery, the Creator of the universe, is just that, a mystery. He is our ultimate destination, the end of our journey home, the completion of our circle, and none of us know why or how or when. All I know is that all roads lead to him, the center of all things. It's the binding force that makes us all one. Our separation from him is temporary, and we are challenged and obliged to find our way back. I've said that God is all truth, all knowledge, and all light. This is the element of God that is Wakantanka, the center and the source. In recognizing this, you will always have a direction. You will always have a place to head for in whatever you do. By knowing this, being lost has vanished from your life, and the farthest you can ever get away from your quest and your journey is simply astray. Welcome to the sacred journey home. Tunkashala, the helping spirits. The word God means many things to many people. I've stated my feelings on the concept of that central source of all existence. The physical realm has a form and a body along with a set of rules and a kind of interdependent hierarchy. The dualically based counterpart of the spirit world is parallel in nature, governed by similar needs. It is my learning and experience that the concept of Tunkashala applies to this realm of the spirit world, from the Creator of all things to the spirit helpers that live with us side by side. Rarely in prayer do I hear elders or quote-unquote teachers refer to Wakantanka, although speaking to the great mystery is not avoided or uncommon. Rather, in prayer, our hope is that our spirit helpers and those spirits that are of a greater power in that world will see our genuine need, our humbleness of thought and feeling, and choose to guide us through the complexities of living. In other words, the term Tunkashala is representative of the entire spirit world, and in particular those spirits that are capable and willing to interact with us. It's the context of our daily prayer or our daily needs that call upon a particular Tunkashala or gathering of spirits. It's important to note here that I know little more than this. The traditional methods of calling upon spirit, the varieties that may exist that may provide various assistance, and the way in which we must conduct ourselves as a result of this interaction are all very limited in my current knowledge. I do, however, have a reasonable understanding of the delicacy of the relationship of our world and theirs. These are powerful beings. They look upon us as simple creatures living in a world of confusion and ignorance, struggling with the simplest of tasks. Their existence is something nearly unfathomable to us. We cannot describe it within the context of our physical references, and we cannot understand its vastness or complexity. They travel the universe unfettered by physical limitations. Their access to the knowledge of existence is seemingly limitless. They are virtually unlimited by time and space and substance as we poor humans are. We have one critical factor in common, though. our journey back to the Creator. As we must care for those that are less than ourselves, they care for us when we are worthy. If we are sincere, if we are truly humble, if we have respect, we might be lucky enough to get their attention. They might have pity on us, understand our plight, and aid us on our way. They know that we are all related. They know that we are all one. They know that we are all on the same path. They also know when we have chosen the right path home. The physical and spiritual worlds are separated and distinct, and they are also constantly interwoven. The encounters we experience can be bad or they can be good. Few of the good ones occur without sincerity of the heart and true humbleness. Remember these few things throughout the course of your journey. You will always have spirit helpers at your side. There will always be spirits of a greater nature that you may call upon to help you, and Tunkashila, the Creator, will always hear your cries. The White Buffalo Calf Woman. In the Lakota tradition, as in most cultures, there are stories of creation and other quote-unquote mythology. In the case of the Lakota, one focuses on a spirit messenger called White Buffalo Calf Woman. Again, I am only familiar with this element of Lakota teachings in basic terms. However, it is the story of how the sacred ceremonies were brought to the people. The following is what I've come to know of it. One day, two young men were out on a hunting party away from their band. They came upon a small white buffalo calf, a very rare thing indeed. As they watched the animal, to their amazement, it transformed into a beautiful young woman. They approached her, each with a different reaction to this mystical maiden alone in the woods. When they inquired as to who she might be, she stated that she had come with a message for the people. One of the hunters did not care to hear this message, for his thoughts and desires were impure. Knowing this, White Buffalo Calf Woman turned him into stone right in front of the other. Naturally, the other young man became very fearful. "Fear not," she said to him. "I sense your thoughts and know you are humble and have a purity of thought. Return to your people and tell them that I will enter your village in 4 days with a sacred message. I will bring 7 sacred ceremonies that will help provide for and heal the people." The young man fled, returning to his people with his story. The people had great difficulty believing him, yet 4 days later the maiden approached the camp. She carried in her arms a pipe of red stone and ashwood stem. "I come among you to bring a message from the Creator, and 7 sacred ceremonies to guide and heal the people. Each is a sacred lesson." She handed the young hunter the pipe she was carrying. "This is the first. It is the sacred pipe of the Spirit of the Creator. Within the next 4 days I will show you its use, and you will learn of its power." The people welcomed her into the camp, and over the next 4 days she helped guide them in understanding this great gift. When the people were instructed, she left the camp for a time, only to return with a new sacred gift. This happened 6 more times. In the end, she left the people saying, "Now you have all you need to know your sacred journey and your Creator. Use them wisely and in a humble way. Teach others this sacred path, and share this knowledge with all nations and all peoples with humble hearts. In many generations I will return to see how the Creator's children have used these great gifts." And with that she was gone. Others may tell this story in different ways and with greater detail. It's all I've come to know of it. My understanding of some of the sacred ceremonies are intermingled with the text that follows. Be careful to understand that this is a reflection of my individual experience and exposure to this, quote, way of walking, unquote. In the first edition of this book, a white buffalo calf had just been born in Wisconsin named Miracle. That in itself was a significant sign. Several others have been born since, interestingly, largely to non-native farmers. They've grown into a significant symbol of hope for peace for people of many cultures. However, Miracle died suddenly in 2004 after only 10 years of life. Adding to the mystery and symbol, another white calf was born during a thunderstorm in 2006 on the same farm. The farm owners named it Miracle's Second Chance. A Lakota elder has described this name as correct and no accident. Miracle's second chance represents a second chance for all humanity. We clearly have a lot to learn to keep us from fouling our home and how we live together. Our first American cultures have known all these years just how to go about it. Perhaps it's time to listen. The Sacred Pipe. Although I've had the opportunity to carry a sacred pipe for nearly the entire time I've walked this way, I will not, at least for now, and maybe never. To obtain and carry a pipe is a great commitment and responsibility. It's something that should be asked of you by the people and provided by Spirit. It's also a great risk. It's been described to me as a loaded gun. It's a quote-unquote key that can be used to open mysterious and dangerous doors, and it embodies many thousands of years of the human spiritual quest. I have a deep respect for those I've known that have taken up the pipe, and I have seen the tragedy of its misuse. In traditional times, prior to the introduction of other cultures to Turtle Island, North America, its use was nearly commonplace. But that was a different time. The people lived in a traditional manner, and their understanding and use of the pipe was long-lived and profound. Without the support of family, community, and nation that has a deep understanding of it, carrying the pipe in these times is a very risky proposition indeed. In the Lakota tradition and others, it consists of a bowl made from a particular red stone found only in one place on earth, in Minnesota, and a stem made from ashwood or beech. The traditional shape of the bowl is usually an upside-down T, with the farthest extension relatively pointed. Almost any other configuration is a product of imagination and artistic license and not traditional. The stem is simple and usually slightly flattened horizontally and a little over a foot in length. Care and respect for the pipe is critical. The first thing you should know is that you ever see one outside of ceremony, perhaps in a glass case in a specialty shop, the bowl should never be attached to the stem, and it would be preferable that it is not displayed at all. Additionally, it should be stored separated stem from bowl, while surrounded by sage and wrapped in red cloth. It should also be kept away from menstruating women. I'll explain my understanding of the reasoning behind this later on. If you ever find yourself personally handling a pipe, whether in ceremony or in a general course of events, remember to, as you are picking it up, point the stem towards the west, and move around the points of the compass in a clockwise direction, north, east, and south. Repeat this before you put it down or hand it away, and always say all my relations while handling the pipe. These few facts may just be enough to keep, quote, the gun, unquote, from going off, whether you are around one that is being cared for properly or not. As for additional information on the sacred pipe, I hesitate to tell you more than this. It's best for you to seek out someone that has made the commitment to carry it. They'll help you understand its meaning and purpose the way it was intended. Recognize, however, all my aforementioned cautions about, quote, teachers, unquote. Someone that has picked up the pipe and is caring for it incorrectly and teaching outside the consensus of tradition has the potential of not only hurting themselves, but you along with them. If I'm sounding ominous, foreboding, and mysterious to you about all this, then I've succeeded. I will tell you this, though. You can compare the power of the pipe to the Christian spirit of Christ, or the will of Allah, or the teachings and spirit of Buddha, or the Catholic's blood of Christ, or even the fundamentalist wrath of God. When it comes from the proper source, when it's cared for correctly, when it's used in a sacred manner, it becomes much, much more than simple wood and stone. It can be bliss and it can be wrath, and it's been entrusted to us weak and feeble humans. Fear it, respect it, cherish it, and look to it for sacred guidance. Wealth, selflessness, and gifting. If you choose to walk this way, there's an aspect of your background that you will most likely have to rip out by the roots, throw away, and completely replace. Especially if you're of European descent, you'll need to recognize that nothing you quote-unquote own truly belongs to you. Everything you have, any of your material possessions, have been gifted to you by the Creator. You have these things for the exclusive purpose of sharing them with those that need them. Whatever quote-unquote wealth you have accumulated, whether it be physical, financial, spiritual, or experiential, is to be shared. There is, however, a caution here. I have come to not believe that voluntary poverty is what Tunkashila had in mind. Too many people have come to believe that wealth in any form is a bad thing. It's simply not our place to judge who has the quote-unquote right to wealth and who does not. If an individual is fortunate enough or works hard enough to attain a level of wealth, it may well be that it is that person's destiny to have it. We have no right to decide for them that they should not have it. That is exclusively an issue between the individual and the Creator. Wealth is perceived by everyone in different ways. One man's wealth is another man's poverty, as one man's poverty is another's wealth. It's simply not up to us to decide which is which. What's often ignored in contemporary culture is that ancient first American concept of balance, the sacred circle, and the idea that we do not have any form of wealth for any purpose other than for the sake of others. Now, this includes the comfort and enrichment of those close to us. So the attainment of these various forms of wealth to keep ourselves and our families and our communities strong is also part of this balance. It is the perspective of its purpose that must be held sacred and respected. In ancient times, the people were quite quote-unquote wealthy in terms of not only spirit, but the abundance of a rich environment. Theirs was a world where all was provided for: food, clothing, shelter, warmth, and the fulfillment of the heart. The modern-day perception of wealth was simply not necessary for happiness. They were content. Remember that if you choose to walk this way, you should give of yourself freely. Whatever you have, knowledge, richness of experience, money, and any other material wealth, is not yours to hoard, but yours to give to enrich and strengthen others. Remember this particularly when you approach anyone for guidance or help in this way. Offer gifts freely to them if and when you ask things of them. If they are true to their commitment to these ways, at no time will they ever, quote, expect payment, unquote, for what you ask. If all you have to offer is a cup of water, it's enough. Give according to your means and your heart, and give without the expectation of anything in return. Remember also, though, that you should not be ashamed of any material wealth you may have, as long as you recognize it for what it is, a gift from the Creator. Things that are sacred. One confusing point, if you think about it, is the conundrum about sacredness. If the Great Spirit is in all things, and all things are therefore sacred, how can one thing be more sacred than another? It's a simple matter of respect and ceremony. Any item, any thing, can become sacred. It's the individual that finds the item relevant and the spiritual connotations to the thing that makes it sacred. A simple common pocket watch may just be an old thing that once told someone the time. But if it was your great-grandfather's pocket watch and given to him by his bride and treasured all his life, it has become a sacred representation of that love and devotion. All items, all things utilized in walking this road are looked upon in this way. The eagle feather that someone uses to blow sage smoke on something is just a simple feather. The sage itself is just a common weed. The shell it's being burned in is one of trillions found in the ocean and on beaches. What gives any item a sacred nature is what it represents. A favorite example of mine that further illustrates this is the, quote, written word, unquote. A word scribbled or scratched on a piece of paper is, in its essence, merely lines connected to form shapes. They have exactly no meaning in and of themselves. What makes the scribbles and scratches relevant is their meaning. What makes the written word sacred and worthy of respect, which also implies care in creating it, is the fact that those words came from the heart and mind of an individual. Many people can't get past the physical thing they see in front of them. They have difficulty applying the quote-unquote theory and understanding what it might represent, and look for a tangible physical understanding. Sacred implies spiritual. This is not physical. It can have no physical reference. Just as the pocket watch represents love, an intangible quote-unquote feeling, the eagle feather represents an intangible too. This is true with all things used in the expression of this spirituality. Heartfelt ceremony, understanding, love, devotion, commitment, and respect are the kinds of things that make things sacred. The nations of creation. As you've learned, the concept of Madakwiye Yoyasin, all my relations, is a rudiment of this spirituality. As the Creator has shown us, the universe is made up of many quote-unquote nations, each relating to one another with commonality. As there are nations of mankind, there are also nations within creation. The oldest of the earthbound nations is that of the stone people. These are the first of the Earth Mother's children. Thousands of millennia ago, when she was an amorphic ball of molten plasma, she began to cool. Her first recognizable feature, her first children, were the layers and swirls of her hardening outer crust that we now call stone. These are our eldest earthly relatives. We are directly and physically connected to them. We are made from their components, and they are with us always. We are their descendants, and they live within us. It's comforted me to know this. When I was growing up, without knowing it, there was always a void within me about the little boy world I played in. Rock and dirt were all around me. I played on them, in them, and with them, yet I never knew who and what they were. What I did not know is that they were me, and I was them. They were my link to my mother, the earth. There are many nations living side by side with us on this earth. When I attend ceremony, I try and remember to pray for them. The two-leggeds, mankind, the tree nation or one-leggeds, the sacred water of the land and sea, the fishes, the four-legged, the winged, and even the creepy-crawly creatures. These and more are the fellow beings in our world that compose it and give it life. The stone nation is our eldest and wisest. It's been said to me that if I'm greatly troubled and I cannot find a resolution to my problem, I should find a stone, any stone. I should hold it and ask the stone people to take these troubles away from me. I should release this distress into the stone, for, you see, the stone is much older than me, and will be there long after I'm gone. It will have the time to work out this distress and the knowledge and patience to do so. This is the value we relatives have for each other. We're here together and intended to work in concert with one another. Remember, too, when you ask a particular nation for help, that you make sure it's not a selfish request and that you give something back. The four directions. The majority of concepts that define the four directions, or the four winds, are still very much unknown to me. There are many stories from all nations of our first Americans that explain their version of their nature and power. For the most part, most of the basic concepts remain consistent from nation to nation. For any specific understanding of a particular nation of first Americans, I suggest that you seek out a pipe carrier, teacher, or elder that can tell you their perspective of that tradition. Again, I can only tell you what I know. One thing I found quite impressive about our first Americans' perception of the earth was their full awareness of its polarity. Their orientation to the 4 points of the compass, their knowledge of the stars, and their confidence in the fact that the earth is round, a sphere, have all been a part of their thinking for thousands of years. The four directions represent many things, and they will vary not only from tribe to tribe, but from individual to individual. What I learned initially is that our first Americans have known for centuries something that anthropologists and geneticists have just recently discovered, that there are 4 genetically distinct nations of mankind. Their ceremony has reflected this for hundreds of generations. The number 4 is one of the most sacred numbers, due in large part to the 4 points of the compass and largely due to the recognition of the 4 nations of mankind. In Lakota ceremony, the one in which I am most familiar, one of 4 colors is designated to each direction: red, white, yellow, and black. The specific reference in a variety of ceremony, as it has been for thousands of years, is that these colors represent different peoples. Another reference in the 4 directions is 4 different types of learning or needs. This will particularly vary from individual to individual. I was taught that the West represents understanding. This doesn't necessarily imply knowledge. As you should know, there is a tremendous difference in, quote, knowing facts, unquote, and understanding a circumstance. I spent many sweat lodge ceremonies facing west, often without knowing why, in my early years. I was also taught that the North represents strength. I think the reasons for this are fairly evident. Strong winds and winter storms often come out of the North, and it takes great strength to live in the environment of the North. There is a wonderful story of a young Aleut boy that sets his mind on conquering the old man of the North that illustrates these perceptions beautifully. I find it fascinating that the Lakota, some anyway, see the East as representative of knowledge. As you may have gathered in my previous discussions, I've noted that Europeans and other cultures used their knowledge and technical skills to do many things, one of which was building boats to get here. Europeans had a distinct drive to acquire as much knowledge as possible, often without taking the time or having the desire to have any understanding for what they learned. What I find poignant and even rather humorous was the fact that many quote-unquote explorers may have known how to build and operate the boats, but they had no idea where they were going and simply threw themselves on fate and faith. I find this highly relevant and relative to the Lakota perspective of the East's representation of knowledge. The people that eventually came from the East to Turtle Island had a tremendous amount of knowledge for the times, with little more than a clue of understanding as to what it was all about. Additionally, in a more positive light, the East's representation of knowledge tells us that it is a sacred thing, something to be acquired cautiously and with respect. Often, as a culture, we disregard this. We particularly disconnect our knowledge from our understanding. We pack our computers and our books to overflowing with little or no attention to understanding it all. You'll notice that the Lakota emphasize understanding first. Lastly, the South represents life. You should note, however, that it is also the place that our ancestors have gone when their time on this earth was done. The Lakota concept of quote-unquote death is not like that of Europeans and other cultures. It's more of a continuum than a drastic alteration representing loss and despair. Death and life are merely different states of being, and both have strong elements of spiritual quote-unquote healthiness. Our culture and our language has come to utilize the word death in far too many negative ways. After all, which is the more permanent state of being? To which should we look for our journey back to the Creator? The physical world can be a source of great joy and love and learning, and it can be a place for self-discovery and experience, but it cannot be, in any way, eternal. The life and health we seek in the South is not only physical, but also spiritual, and we do not seek it for ourselves, but in respect of our ancestors and for the good of future generations. We look to these 4 directions for guidance in the lessons of living that they represent. But too, they remain a connection to our Mother the Earth and help us understand and stay close to home. Water, the sacred gift of life. As the earth cooled and its elements began to come into focus, surrounding the stone people was a blanket of vapor. As this vapor cooled, it condensed and became water. This is not only part of our first Americans' perspective, represented in myths and stories of the elders, but basic scientific fact. After the Stone Nation, the next most sacred element of life is water. Unlike other spiritual forces, I have rarely, if ever, heard the sacred waters of the Earth Mother referred to as anything other than a single entity. It can be considered one of the most critical representations of the spirit of the Earth Mother, patient, nurturing, ever-changing, life-giving, powerful, and yet humble, always finding its way back close to the Earth Mother. Water is a key element in virtually all ceremony. The Grandfathers. Earlier, I discussed the dualic nature of the universe. I mentioned that the first division was that between the physical and the spiritual. Wankantanka, the greatest mystery of all, must have seen that there must be a further division in order to perpetuate his creation, which came in the division of male and female, or opposing but compatible forces that combined to cause the creation of a new force or entity. Without this quote-unquote dance of the male and female throughout the span of creation, new life would not have been possible. In Lakota philosophy, I've discovered that the forces that are considered to be male are generally referred to as the grandfathers and tend to have less quote-unquote form or substance than female forces. Usually, in ceremony, the grandfathers are those spirits that are traveling across the Milky Way throughout the stars and are called upon to help or guide. Often the grandfather spirits of the thunder beings are also referred to. The thunder beings are considered to be more earthbound spiritual creatures and travel within the Earth Mother's clouds, storms, and lightning. The spirits of the four directions are generally referred to as a part of this community of grandfathers. To put what I've learned about the thunder beings in a more Western, so-called clinical perspective, you might see them as the Earth Mother's mate. As I've walked this way, this has made more and more sense to me. The Earth Mother possesses the womb of life, all the elements necessary to manifest, nurture, and perpetuate life. The grandfathers, specifically the thunder beings, provide the spark of life. As I've said, as the earth cooled and its formless shape began to divide, the sacred water began an interplay with the stone people and the thunder beings. The solid nature of the stone interacted with the abrasive nature of the churning, boiling, cooling, and condensing water to initiate the processes of providing the elements of life. Without the static yet rich elements of the Earth Mother combined with the dynamic, even violent forces of the thunder beings in the sacred water, the earth would have remained a quote-unquote lifeless ball of stone. This is an excellent example of the sacred nature of the interplay of the forces of male and female. Without them, the Earth Mother would not have been quote-unquote born, and subsequently neither would we. Both male and female carry equal weight and require equal respect in our first Americans' philosophy and spirituality. This has always been reflected in not only their spirituality, but their everyday lives. Sacred herbs. It's important for you to recognize that my point of reference in this is through the Lakota spirituality generally from the South Dakota area. Other tribes, even other Lakota, will use different herbs. If you choose to walk the Red Road and participate in ceremony, you'll see the use of various herbs and plants. Generally, a non-spiritual person or person that has not accepted the responsibility of the pipe will use only 4. This is what I'm accustomed to. They are sage, sweetgrass, flat cedar, and tobacco. The most commonly used is tobacco. The most common relevance of the use of these substances is to, quote, please the spirits, unquote. My own conclusion about this is that we live on a tiny speck of dust floating on a huge cloud of countless others in the smoke of our universe. It is quite likely that these herbs and plants are unique to this place. Whether it's the aroma or composition or simply our humble efforts to acquire and offer these things that attracts and pleases the spirits, I simply do not know. I have simply been shown that they are a part of this tradition, and by choosing this way, I recognize and respect their traditional use and endeavor to learn their meaning. Generally, tobacco can be in a variety of forms, but usually it is simply unprocessed, dried, and crushed tobacco leaves. Some say that it is more traditional to use the scrapings from the inside of the bark of the red willow. This may be that contemporary tobacco is generally a variety that came out of the West Indies and was not commonly available in earlier times. It's conceivable, though, that it was available back then through trade among the nations. It's difficult to tell. Tobacco is commonly carried with you, so that it's easily available and so that you are exposed to its spiritual nature and it is exposed to yours. When you offer it, under a variety of circumstances, it has been, quote, a part of you, unquote, for a time, and you a part of it. You are essentially offering a part of yourself. Sage is another of the basic sacred herbs. Although some do not, I've been shown that it's often used to burn and quote-unquote smudge things to please the spirits, or even drive others away. You generally smudge yourself and your belongings prior to ceremony, or afterwards before storing them. My exposure has been to Northern Plains sage where it's commonplace. Difficult to find, though, here on the East Coast where I live. The groups I've been involved with make reasonably frequent trips out west, as I was able to once, and return with enough to help us through ceremony. It's frequently and particularly used in the sweat lodge, as I will explain later, and often sacred items are stored in a bed of it. Dried flat cedar is also used for smudging in a variety of ceremony. It can also be used for the storage of sacred items. It has a sweet aroma when burned, and I occasionally mix it with sage when I'm smudging or add a little to my tobacco pouch for offerings. Sweetgrass is a sacred herb that I've used less often, usually due to its availability where I live, but possibly due to my personal spiritual development. You may recall my earlier discussion of Indian time. I've accepted the probability that, as the spirits reveal this way to me, I may only now be ready to begin to understand sweetgrass. Usually, the pipe carriers and medicine people that have shown me ceremony use it to attract the good spirits. It seems to be a favorite of the good ones and repels the bad ones. Keep one important thing in mind if you seek these 4 herbs to use in ceremony. Try to avoid obtaining them by commercial purchases. The connection of quote-unquote money should be avoided with anything having to do with this way of walking. Do your best to find it in nature or trade for it with someone that has it available to them, and always offer or give something in return. When my family and I traveled through South Dakota in 1990 and we simply stopped by the side of the road to pick it, I made sure to make an offering of tobacco, and then tied pairs of white and red cloth ribbon to the remaining sage. I wish to symbolize the respect I had as a member of the white nation for the sacrifice of the red nation to bring this way to me. The herbs that become relevant to you will be ones that will come to you as you walk this way. Remember, as many other elements of this spirituality are, they will help you remain grounded in your nature as a quote-unquote child of our Earth Mother, and they will aid you on your path with the help of spirits that recognize your humble offering of them. Sacred numbers and symbols. As you've seen, there develops a relevance to certain numbers and symbols in this way. Again, it is not the symbols themselves that are the focus of their sacredness, but the concepts behind them. A graphic representation of a circle divided into 4 parts, which are equally filled with red, white, yellow, and black, does not become an object that is prayed to or worshipped. The sacredness of it is within the principles and philosophy it illustrates. You'll find numbers referred to in a variety of ways, but basically you'll find the numbers 4, 6, and 7 most common. Let me give you my interpretation of the numbers 1 through 7 as I've come to know them. The number 1 should be fairly obvious to you by now. It's seldom referred to in terms of any number in ceremony, but it obviously represents the singular force of our one Creator, as I've discussed at length. The number 2 is similarly not referred to in ceremony, but illustrates the dualic nature of the universe as I've previously explained. In my several years of exposure to this way, I've never heard reference to the number 3 in ceremony. I'm not entirely certain why this is. I have a suspicion, though, and you should be forewarned. One of the dualic elements I have not discussed, and will not beyond this, is what you might say is between darkness and light. In Lakota, it's referred to as being between Wakan and Heyoka. As I see it, the number 3 has relevance to this circumstance in the universe and is generally avoided. It is the intent of this way to focus on enlightenment and fulfillment, not ignorance and darkness. The number 4, as I've already touched on and will explain in further detail, is the most frequent number referred to. It represents many of the sacred principles throughout this philosophy and spirituality. The number 5 appears to be treated similarly to the number 3. I'm only able to suppose that these numbers lack symmetry and too frequently represent imbalance, a state of being this path does not emphasize. The number 6 is treated similarly in ceremony and in discussions of principle to the number 4. Adding to the representations of the number 4, the 4 directions, is the perception of the Earth Mother along with the grandfathers. The number 6 expands on the basic structure of the universe to include these two concepts to provide an overall perception. The number 7 is seldom referred to in ceremony, but it is an important one. It includes the concept of Wankantanka, our one creator, and provides a complete perception of creation. Since the number 4 is considered sacred by what it represents, so are multiples of 4. I've seen 12 used as I have 16. 16 has been referenced as a quote-unquote turning point in the number of years someone walks in this way. One pipe carrier I know wishes to live to complete 4 cycles of 16 years. He is my age and in the midst of his 3rd cycle. Also, multiples are used in ceremony to call upon groups of spirits by creating certain numbers of, quote, tobacco ties, unquote, or ghosts that are made of pinches or bundles of tobacco-colored cloth and cotton string. Other symbols and images have relevance in this way. If you see the image of the turtle, it's usually representative of the quote-unquote island of North America. The eagle is a symbol that provokes an image of strength and vision, the bear of individual fortitude and raw power, or the feather as a symbol of spiritual journey, and there are many others. Again, remember though that unlike other spiritualities, these items, symbols, and representations are not looked upon, quote, idolistically, but are simple reminders drawn from the first Americans' traditional environment that represent sacred principles. The sacred teepee. My personal knowledge of traditional use of the teepee is currently less than rudimentary, even though I own one. I do know, however, a few essential things. The teepee is much more than a simple shelter, as many of our first Americans' dwellings are. The teepee, for the Lakota and other tribes, is an essential part of spiritual life. It's a place for personal reflection, a place for dreaming, a place for communing with family, a place for talking and learning, and a place to be close to the Earth Mother and her energy and spirit. If you choose to walk this road, you too might find access to one. If you have the opportunity, try to get access to a quote-unquote traditional teepee, one that was obtained and constructed in a traditional manner with its components and by proper ceremony. Although it's easy to simply order one from one of the many companies that are now manufacturing them, much of their meaning may be lost to you. There are representations in their shape, structure, and use that you should learn from tradition. I feel it important to mention, however, that you might consider it a part of your beginnings. Remember, though, the things that can happen with the use of a teepee can happen at a kitchen table, or riding in a car, or sitting by a campfire, or anywhere else in our daily lives. The teepee can become a trapping if it is not used wisely and in a sacred manner. A teepee is a reminder of the sacred ways of this land, not an end in itself. Use it if you need the reminder. Also, even though the teepee is the more iconic dwelling of native life, it was used mostly on the Western Plains and not elsewhere. The same, or at least similar principles apply to other structures in native life. Most native cultures viewed the home in a sacred manner, particularly since the family and community life that surrounded them was also considered sacred. You shouldn't focus exclusively on the teepee as a place where sacred things happen. If you own or have access to one, you'll understand its special nature. But homes of all types should be treated in this way. A place for comfort and safety of family, a place to honor guests, and a place for honesty and courtesy. Whether your exposure is to a Navajo Hogan or a Kiva, an Algonquin log house or a Seminole Chickie, treat all with respect as a place for love and learning. The principles should be in your heart and not locked into the physical thing. It should only be used to help you on your way to learn the principles it represents. End of Part 5.